Culture of a nation is a set of knowledge, beliefs, traditional values, lifestyle, literature, language and morals which are being practiced by the natives of the country at a particular time. Culture is dynamic by nature. Globalization has affected the cultures of various countries in both positive and negative ways. Surveys are used as a tool to collect information from some or all units of a population and compile the information into a useful form. There are two different types of surveys that can be used to collect information in different circumstances to satisfy differing needs. These are sample surveys and censuses. Reference handling and duplicate screening was performed using EndNote and Covidence. After removal of duplicates, titles and abstracts were screened independently by two authors. Disagreements regarding inclusion were resolved through discussion. In case of continued disagreement, inclusion was decided by a third author. When running a sample survey, there are several design considerations that need to be taken into account that are specific to sample surveys. These additional factors include sample size, sample design, the mode of estimation based on survey results and, where applicable, stratification, allocation of the sample across the strata, and the selection of the sample within the strata. Every coin has two faces. Changing market environment brings new issues in front of the world. On one hand, globalization is converting world into a global village where there is a better access to products and services, while on the other hand, loss of individual culture, identity, colonization and exploitation are its another face. People and government policies should work together. People who are not eligible for a free jab could pay for one at pharmacies and supermarkets, although availability is limited currently while stocks are prioritized to those who need it the most. Boots has temporarily suspended its bookings for anyone under the age of 65, and is temporarily limiting existing stocks to those at highest risk, people 65 and over. One of the most important, yet underappreciated, features of the Arctic sea ice is the ability of its blindingly white surfaces to reflect sunlight. For at least as long as our species has existed, the frozen seas at the top of our world have acted as a massive parasol that helps keep the planet cool and its climate stable. It may not be a particularly elegant term, but it describes a potentially profound idea, that we may be living through the most influential period of time ever. And it's about far more than the COVID-19 pandemic and politics of 2020. Leading philosophers and researchers are debating whether the events that occur in our century. If London's population continues to rapidly grow, by 2050 it may be home to more than 11 million people, and the climate crisis accelerates, the challenge will only become more urgent. Transport, energy infrastructure, waste, new construction and existing architecture, all need to take steps to achieve carbon neutrality. Educational pattern and system has also changed due to this cross-border culture. To be fit in this changing scenario, more developed and modern skills are being acquired by the students worldwide. It has led to a greater understanding of literature, or cultures of different parts of the world. Steel, for instance, which is often used for building skyscrapers, is responsible for at least 7% of global carbon dioxide emissions, releasing 12.2 tons of carbon dioxide per cubic meter used, in part due to the heating process involved in making it. Concrete produces 550 kilograms, 1,200 pounds, carbon dioxide per cubic meter used, but its main ingredient, cement. Both men and women work to make these organic floating beds, which last for around 5 to 6 months. Farmers grow vegetables like okra, bitter gourd, snake gourd, spinach and brinjal on these beds, and sometimes spices like turmeric and ginger. Besides vegetables, rice seedlings can sometimes be grown. During the monsoon, farmers use small boats to navigate between these small islands. The air temperature inside the metro tunnel is around 10 Celsius, 18 Fahrenheit, higher than outdoors. This heat mainly comes from human bodies moving around the station, and the heat generated by the trains, says Genevieve Littert, climate and energy strategist at the social housing construction company Paris Habitat, which designed the heat extraction system. During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union built more than 400 nuclear-powered submarines, a silent service that gave the adversaries a way to retaliate, even if their missile silos and strategic bombers had been taken out in a sudden first strike. Just 60 miles, 97 kilometers, from the border with NATO member Norway. Recovering the reactor compartments will involve salvage jobs in frigid waters that are safe for such operations only 3 or 4 months out of the year. The 2 nuclear submarines, which together contain 1 million curies of radiation, or about a quarter of that released in the first month of the Fukushima disaster, will pose an even greater challenge. Raising a submarine is a rare feat of engineering. The United States spent $800 million, £610 million, in an attempt to lift another Soviet submarine, the diesel-powered K-129 that carried several nuclear missiles, from 16,400 feet, 5,000 meters, in the Pacific Ocean, under the guise of a seabed mining operation. Though their presence in the Shabi Sands might suggest otherwise, South Africa's leopard population faces an uncertain future. In a country where reserves and national parks are surrounded by farms, roads and developments, leopards have been forced into ever smaller areas. Genetic diversity improves overall health and resilience, helping species survive events such as extreme droughts or disease outbreaks. If a population becomes too small, they go into what is known as a depressant spiral, Nord explains, which is the start of genetic deterioration in the population. Curiously, very few of these plants have been found in Indonesia, which is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, and also has the largest nickel deposit in the world, just where you might expect to find a nickel hyper-accumulator. Tioa says that this is largely because very few people have spent the time looking. The rise of social media is undoubtedly the key to this era of dark speculation, as people can ever more easily spread and amplify their suspicions. Indeed, in August, the US president himself endorsed the support of him by prominent conspiracy theorists. Away from the town's historical core, along the cobbles to the quayside, place names reflect the borderland geography. The River Tweed, meaning border in an ancient Celtic tongue, flows almost between the two nations, while Old Salmon Shields, a Scots word describing antiquated huts for fishermen, dot the banks deep upriver into Scottish territory. In the US, most women adopt their husband's family name when they get hitched, around 70%, according to one of the largest data analyses in recent years. For British women, the figure is almost 90%, according to a 2016 survey, with around 85% of those aged between 18 and 30 still following the practice. While more than 45% of jobs in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. could be performed at home, in Las Vegas and Florida's Fort Myers, the figure was less than 30%. These disparities are also evident on a global scale. In Sweden and the United Kingdom, more than 40% of jobs could go remote, but fewer than 25% in Mexico and Turkey could. Further compounding these dramatic figures is the speed at which many suddenly found themselves without work, either laid off with some form of termination payment, asked to take indefinite unpaid leave, or outright fired. This is, of course, a financial challenge for many who have suddenly lost their income, but it also presents a psychological challenge. The real downside of procrastination comes when, in your rush to finish, you encounter the naturally higher chance of doing your work incompletely or inaccurately. In the case of emails, sometimes waiting to respond can show respect for careful thought over expediency, especially if the content of the message is emotional. Despite people's desperate condition, there was one source of food that remained untouched if you knew where to look. The Institute of Plant Industry's Gene Bank in Leningrad was and remains the largest collection of seeds in the world, the most comprehensive catalogue of plants' genetic information we have. The reason that storing food in airtight containers is less effective is because there are probably already a lot of microbes on the food before you put it in the container, and some of those microbes are perfectly happy in low-oxygen environments. Some microbes that spoil meat, for example, are anaerobic, meaning they respire without the need for oxygen. In other countries, the importance of civil defense has fallen off the agenda in recent years. By the 1980s, the UK had developed a range of civil defense preparedness measures, some of which, regional controllers situated around the country, would have helped ensure continuity of government. Others, such as air raid sirens and information campaigns, were directed specifically at the public. There are around 20 known supervolcanoes on Earth, with major eruptions occurring on average once every 100,000 years. One of the greatest threats an eruption may pose is thought to be starvation, with a prolonged volcanic winter potentially prohibiting civilization from having enough food for the current population. On the 29th of August 1949, the Soviets had tested their first nuclear device, known as Jo-1 in the West, on the remote steppes on what is now Kazakhstan, using intelligence gleaned from infiltrating the US's atomic bomb program. In the intervening years, their test program had surged in leaps and starts, detonating more than 80 devices. These findings are all the more alarming, given that more than half of the world's population now live in urban environments, and more of us are traveling in congested areas than ever before. Staggeringly, the World Health Organization says, 9 out of 10 of us frequently breathe in dangerous levels of polluted air. Most of us would like to think of our personalities as relatively stable throughout our lives. But research suggests this is not the case. Our traits are ever shifting, and by the time we're in our 70s and 80s, we've undergone a significant transformation. And while we're used to couching aging in terms of deterioration and decline, around the world there are millions, if not billions, of unused electronic devices in our homes, old mobile phones, neglected games consoles, ancient stereos, outdated computer equipment and defunct printers to name a few. Each of these contains copper, silver and even gold, along with a wide range of valuable rare earth elements. Some 50 to 100 million people died in the 1918 influenza pandemic, numbers that surpass the death toll of World War I, which was being fought at the same time. The 1918 flu virus infected 1 in every 3 people on the planet. HIV, a pandemic that is still with us and still lacks a vaccine. The signals are received by NASA's Deep Space Network, giant satellite dishes scattered around the world, designed to pick up data from distant spacecraft. As I watch, Duty Mission Controller Enrique Medina calls up a ground station near Canberra, Australia to establish contact with Voyager. Westerners tend to see the central circle in the first picture as being smaller than the central circle in the second, when they are actually the same size. And just as Rivers had seen with the Muller-Lyer illusion, Davidoff's team found that the traditional Himba were far less susceptible than those of us living in modern societies. On the 24th of March 2018, more than 2 million people took to the streets in the US to protest gun violence. What the solution to that problem looks like depends on who you ask. Some wish to repeal citizens' rights to bear arms, while others want to arm even more people. Most Americans have opinions that fall somewhere in between. Even though we don't create it to be a visual delight for others to admire, we can find the beauty in the awesome way code works, on its functionality, on its efficiency. Each part of the code assembled together creates a whole engine that processes information in many ways until we get what is needed. The Shining is clearly a work of fiction. But when it comes to mental illness and violence, the public, media and policy makers often have difficulty discerning fact from fantasy. Opinion polls consistently reveal that the majority of adults in the US believe that people with mental illnesses are more likely to be violent than those without. Many of us don't get the recommended 7 to 9 hours we need each night and struggle to get up in the mornings, especially on work days. But it isn't only our quantity of sleep that's affected. Since the discovery that light, particularly blue light, emanating from devices like smartphones, can affect our biological clocks. 3 billion people, around 40% of the world's population, use online social media, and we're spending an average of 2 hours every day sharing, liking, tweeting and updating on these platforms, according to some reports. That breaks down to around 500,000 tweets and Snapchat photos shared every minute. Facebook had a positive effect on self-esteem compared to other activities that boost self-awareness. Mirrors and photos, the researchers explained, make us compare ourselves to social standards, whereas looking at our own Facebook profiles might boost self-esteem, because it is easier to control how we present it to the world. The question of where creative insights come from, and how to get more of them, has remained a subject of great speculation for thousands of years. According to scientists, they can be driven by anything from fatigue to boredom. The prodigies themselves have other, even less convincing ideas. Describing yourself as a social media addict doesn't usually inspire concern from other people. In fact, it's frequently included in bio descriptions on Twitter and Instagram. Decorate your LinkedIn profile with such a claim, and you may even find yourself receiving interest from media and publishing companies searching for a savvy digital native. Another recent study compared people's responses when they played computer games during the evening on a normal smartphone screen versus one that suppressed blue light. Players felt more alert after using the conventional smartphones and performed worse in cognitive tests the next day, suggesting that their sleep may have suffered. In astronomy and navigation, the celestial sphere is an imaginary sphere of arbitrarily large radius, concentric with Earth. All objects in the observer's sky can be thought of as projected upon the inside surface of the celestial sphere, as if it were the underside of a dome. The celestial sphere is a practical tool for spherical astronomy, allowing observers to plot positions of objects. The final public oral examination is a final examination in the student's field of study, as well as a defense of the dissertation. The department holds the final public oral examination after the graduate school reviews and accepts the reader's reports and is satisfied that all other requirements have been met. delaying or avoiding medical care despite health problems is not a new concept. People often downplay the severity of their symptoms, believe they will resolve on their own, or perceive they can manage themselves at home. This reasoning is now compounded by fear of becoming infected with COVID-19, as well as overburdening the healthcare system. Consumerism has permeated and changed the fabric of contemporary Indian society. Western fashions are coming to India. The traditional Indian dress is increasingly being displaced by Western dresses, especially in urban areas. Indian MTV, soap television, and films set a stage for patterns of behavior, dress codes, and jargon. Global interaction, rather than insulated isolation, has been the basis of economic progress in the world. Trade, along with migration, communication, and dissemination of scientific and technical knowledge, has helped to break the dominance of rampant poverty and the pervasiveness of nasty, brutish and short lives that characterized the world.